Good morning, everybody. Hello. Hello to you all. Hope you're doing well. Everything is good.
Oh, let me go back. I didn't really I just pay attention to the words, not the picture.
There's everybody. You're on. We can hear you. People are joining us from all around the country. Well, quite a few places.
We're just across the valley.
Don't brag.
I can see your house from our backyard.
Can you?
Yeah.
Is it on fire? I hope it's not on fire or something. That would be
No, it's not. No.
That
There's a
would
little
be
smoke coming from your roof, but
that would be embarrassing. Oh my goodness, this house is on fire.
Good morning. I've got things to do in my kitchen, so I'm gonna listen for most of the.
Okay. Don't forget, you can always jump on and add something if you want to. And we're going to be reading about Jacob today and his fine family. What's going on with that family? No, it'll be good. What is it like up in the Bay Area right now, Diana?
It's raining. Started early in the morning. It's cloudy. It's not raining right this second, but it's cloudy. It's going to be maybe in the upper 60s later on.
There you go. There's the weather report from Palo Alto, or from the Palo Alto.
How about a weather report from Colorado, Jeff?
Well, what about Colorado? Yeah, what's the weather like there?
Warmer too.
It's warmer. I can't hear you. Wait, you're muted. No, oh, God, I'm muted. What? Okay, go. Wait, no. Try again, Jeff. You're on. I did it. Oh, man. This is like there you go. There you go, Jeff.
Yeah, okay. Today's going to be a little warmer. Yesterday was in the mid-30s. It was raining. I thought for sure it was going to snow, but it did not. A little bit warmer. Up to like 78 by Wednesday.
Okay.
We're happy.
That's crazy. We heard that some restaurants are opening up in Colorado. Is that true?
Yeah. No, some are. We get food to go. It's just the way to do it.
I just checked our temperature right now. It's 70. Pretty nice.
It's 70 over there?
Something like that. I don't know.
No.
Something like that.
Yeah. 61.
Yeah, that's about right.
Well, maybe it's 70 in my house.
It's about 61.
Sun's right in my eyes. I will tell you it's not 61 in here. Okay. So today is election day, by the way, too, folks. It's election day, so go out and vote. Or I guess send in your ballot. It's weird. It's May 12th and we're voting in our homes. All right, folks. We're waiting for a couple more people to join and be part of our group today. I think Judith is reading today. Yay, Judith. Judith is reading today.
I also gave you a new background.
Oh yeah, I see that. I see that. Yeah, I noticed that most people in our class are not playing around with backgrounds.
My computer doesn't do it.
I think most people got, they had fun with that for like the first few days, and then it got old. Let's see, who else do we have? Anybody else from out of town right now? The Schwartzes are not on right now, so we can't get a weather report from Missouri.
But the right Schwartzes are here.
Right,
Yeah.
Schwartzes. Well, you
As
are.
opposed to the left
But
one.
not the,
I was just going to say.
No, actually, we're the left ones.
well, compared to those Schwartzes, you are. I don't think you're exactly on the left, but
No, compared to the other
Yeah.
Schwartzes, we are.
Correct. It's all relative.
Okay, let's just call it, we're the middle Schwartzes.
The crazy thing is he's not even the only Mike Schwartz, but anyways, that's it.
6, don't we?
No, we don't have, we have many Schwartzes, but we only have 2 Mike Schwartzes.
Oh.
I went to college with a Mike Schwartz, and it wasn't me.
That's way too like mind blowing to think about.
Well, we're going to get going. We don't have a lot of people this morning, which is weird because I just did a little, I reminded everybody to come on Facebook. I said, jump on. But I don't know. I don't think elections are pulling people away, but I don't know what else. But we're going to get going. And I'm sure we're going to have some people join on again. The Afikoman Schwartzes. That's what Francine has said. There you go.
Roman Schwartzes?
Yeah. The middle ones.
Oh, the middle ones.
You
Oh,
should-
very clever.
Very clever, Francine. So I'm going to wait a second. I'm going to see. She needed to have her. We're going to stream it on Facebook so that I forget to do that sometimes, so that people can watch from other places too, even if they don't have the Zoom. I do want to remind people that last night, we started Lag Bomer, the 33rd day of the Omer, which means we have about 2.5 weeks to Shavuot, our next Chag, which we're going to be doing together with Congregation Beth Shalom, which means that they're hosting Zoom. It's their Zoom address. So I'm going to be posting, I have the Zoom address now, and I'll be posting it up for people today, so that you can join us for that, I'm having problems getting on. I'm going to tell you, I'm having problems getting on Facebook. This is not the first that happened last time too. Sorry.
The other Schwartzes are working on it. They're having computer challenges.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let a couple other people in, but yes. So Shavuot will be the evening of. It's actually 2 weeks from Thursday. So 2 weeks Thursday night on May 28th. We're going to be starting a little bit earlier at 6:30, and we'll be doing our program for about an hour, study session for about an hour, and then we're going to light candles. We're going to finish with the candles for Chag. So that was kind of the decision of how we were going to do this together with Beth Shalom. So
Do we have a topic?
Not yet. We're working on it, but I can tell you it'll be related to our current predicament. That's for sure. So I'm hoping that if we don't do this on the same exact thing, I mean, we don't have to do the same subject, but hopefully it'll dovetail nicely together what we're going to study. So there is a tradition of studying all night, which we're not going to be doing this year, though we've threatened to do it before. This would actually be the perfect year to do it because, we could do it all in line and people could come in and out and whatever, but it doesn't appear that that's what, excuse me, it doesn't appear that this year is also going to be the year for that.
Up here, Temple Shir Chadash, where Melanie Aaron is, we're having it from 8:30 to midnight. And then everybody's supposed to eat cheesecake.
And then everybody eats cheesecake, did you say, Diane?
That's what they said.
Very nice. No, listen, it's it should be a good year for doing that, but people are so messed up with time and
Space continuum.
tired, people just being tired and stuff. I mean, like on one hand, this is the perfect year to do it, and on the other hand, I think people are just really kind of messed up. But yeah, I mean, technically it should be the year that we could do it, but
They're breaking it up. There's going to be a film by Gil Montz, The Angel Who Redeems, and then they're going to have a British scholar talking about who wrote The Legacy of Anne Frank. He'll be sharing new insights. So it's a whole thing.
wow,
Yeah,
awesome.
go look at their.
I will.
Sure.
Maybe I'll share it out. That's Judith's cousin by marriage.
Oh, I know she
Melanie.
hiring. Darn it.
The Iron
Yeah,
Man.
she is. What's her last date?
I don't know. We're having the gala at the end of the month, all virtual, and
Oh, that's sad.
about the interim rabbi, and the cantor will stay, and then there's another rabbi, but he's more for the kids. He's not He had 100 ums during his Torah. I counted them. I couldn't stay.
Oh no. Excuse me. Oh yeah, still trying to share this on Facebook. We're gonna get going. I mean, excuse me, but that's another sad thing to leave. How long was Melanie at Shir Hadash for? Somebody?
40 years.
40 years.
Is it 40 years?
Yes.
How old am I?
It's a long time. I'm only halfway through that. I will just say this: that is a long time, and it really is sad that somebody has to say goodbye to their community. She's not leaving the area, though, is she?
No. She'll be the rabbi emeritus, but she just wants to have more time. She'll come in for certain things, maybe some study groups, and we always have her wisdom.
She has grandbaby now, so you all don't count.
And her husband is retiring too,
Yep.
so that's why.
All right. Well, we're going to get going. It's 9:10. I know there's people coming on. Some people know yesterday we celebrated Tracy's birthday, and we had a chance to get one of her favorite restaurants, and by bringing it in, let me make it very clear, we brought it in, yeah, it was nice considering, we were like everybody else trying to have some semblance of normalcy. But
What was the restaurant?
it's called Crossroads Kitchen, and it's on Melrose and Sweetser. So pretty much like West Hollywood, but almost at La Cienega. So it's almost like Beverly Center area. And all I can tell you is I left the house at 5:30, waited for the food they wasn't ready, waited for the food from about 6 till 6:15, and still made it home by 6:45. So I normally would not have relished we would not have in normal circumstances done a round trip of picking up food from West Hollywood, but it worked out fine. And it was not cold and it was insane, but she loved it, and it was very good. I will say that it's one of the top vegan restaurants in the country. But I noticed something really interesting, which was the owner of the restaurant, the chef, he's a celebrity chef named Tal Ronen. He's actually Israeli. He was actually working in the front of the restaurant, which I've never seen the guy before and ever. I've been there many times. I've never seen him. I've never seen him in the restaurant, but it shows you how these are strange times. So he was helping to get his stuff out. So we're going to ask Judith to read today, who's our another reader. She's a very competent reader. She reads a lot. That's why we have her reading, because she's a very good reader. So we're going to share up where we are right now, which is last week we read about the birth of Jacob's children. So I was going to say sons, but of course we read about just towards the end last week, we read about the birth of Dinah, the daughter that of course, we also read a Midrash that he has other daughters, that actually every time he has a son, there's a twin daughter that comes along too. But we don't have their names, and we have no version of that in the Torah, maybe even you would say a hint, other than the rabbis were concerned of who did these people marry. But that's also troubling to think about. We're going to get into some stories. We're basically following along. The narrative that we're following along in the Torah right now is primarily, right now we're about Genesis chapter 30. Excuse me. And today we're going to be moving into the story of Jacob fleeing his father-in-law Laban. That's what we're going to be reading now. So chapter 30 actually begins with Jacob. It begins with Jacob's son Joseph being born, and it actually begins. Chapter 30 begins when Rachel saw that she had borne Jacob no children. She became envious of her sister, And Rachel said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. And then we read, oh no, sorry, that was the beginning of chapter 3. That was how Bilhah came along. No, we were reading, sorry, we're the middle of chapter 30. It's hard to believe that, because the Midrash takes pages sometimes to get through a chapter. This is the line I'm looking for. Here it is. Here's the line. So the last thing is Jacob, the last part we had read last time was, there's the Schwartzes. Last, she bore him a son, Leah, bore him a daughter named Dinah. And God remembered Rachel. God heeded her and opened her womb. This is Genesis chapter 30, verse 22. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. So she named him Joseph, which is to say, may the Lord add another son for me. And that's what we left off last time with the words, Rachel called her son Joseph, increase. God gave me an additional son. Prophetess as she was, she foresaw she would have a second son, but an increase added on by God is larger than the original capital itself. Benjamin, the second son, whom Rachel regarded merely as a supplement, had 10 sons, while Joseph begot only 2. These 12 together may be considered the 12 tribes born by Rachel. Had Rachel not used the form of expression, the Lord add to me another son, she herself would have begotten 12 tribes with Jacob. So it's a weird midrash, not a very long midrash, and it doesn't help us with a lot other than it tells us that Rachel shouldn't have been naming her son Joseph with kind of an idea of what would happen in the future. And on one hand, kind of weird. Look, the Midrash is pointing out a weird thing, which is you have a son and you name your son, may God give me more sons. It's not really a nice thing to say about your son. It was, now I had a son, I hope I get more sons. So it's a weird name. It's a weird reason that Joseph's name is Joseph, an increase, it means increase. The Torah says that. And so the rabbis are really are commenting on the fact that this is a weird thing to say. Now, Jacob's sons with Rachel are Joseph and Benjamin, and they are two of the sons who move the narrative and who are going to be very important for the story. When we're going to be reading today and next week, we're going to be reading commentaries on chapter 30, 31, 32. We're going to be reading probably through some of the chapters kind of when we get through to this week. Some of them are a little, they're a little less, there's a little less in the Midrash. So we're going to be moving through some of the text a little bit faster. But it's really important to know that these stories in Genesis, pretty much chapter 30 through 37, 38, they're a weird series of vignettes about Jacob and his family. And they're weird because they go into different, they have different pieces to them. They have different themes, but the themes are probably all written by the same author, so it's not that issue. But the themes are, they're difficult, they're challenging, they have some really strange things in them, including what we call the rape of Dinah, which is obviously just by the title, is not a easy story to swallow and deal with. These are stories that are in Genesis problematic just at the face of them. So the Midrash will in some cases make them more problematic. But there's another issue too, which is that all these stories that we're about to read have interesting versions and kind of revisit them in the story of David and his family. So these stories are reused, recycled, repurposed in the book of Samuel in the Bible. So we'll talk about that as we read it. But all of these stories that we're about to read have similar, and it's not a coincidence. It's either written by the same author, the author of Samuel intentionally revisited these stories. but these are including really the coat of many colors, which is in chapter 37. These next 8 chapters are really important for the biblical narrative, not just in Genesis, but later on in the history of our people. So we're going to start with again, we're kind of towards the end of chapter 30 of Genesis. So Judith, if you'd like to start, we're going to start with Jacob fleeing Laban.
Jacob flees before Laban. Jacob had only been waiting for Joseph to be born to begin preparations for his journey home. The Holy Spirit had revealed to him that the house of Joseph would work the destruction of the house of Esau, and therefore Jacob exclaimed at the birth of Joseph, "Now I need not fear Esau or his legions." About this time, Rebekah sent her nurse Deborah.
Okay, well, yeah, you pause there for a reason, which is what exactly does that mean? So again, there seems to be this understanding, and the next line after we read that Joseph is born, that Jacob starts this this move towards leaving. So again, chapter 30 is kind of a long chapter, but right after the line in after she names him Joseph, which again, it's Rachel that's naming the son. If you notice, it's not Jacob. After Rachel had born Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Give me leave to go back to my homeland." So that is what the Torah says. The Torah gives us that as a launching off point, that the birth of Joseph was in some way connected to this decision to depart. So what's his decision to depart about? That Joseph's presence is going to help him defeat Esau when the time comes. Now, again, it doesn't say when that time will come. It could be, as they're kind of alluding to, hundreds of years later. But Joseph's mere presence now allows him to feel like he can return home. So his returning home, Jacob's return home, is predicated on his feeling safe and not having to worry about Esau. Because again, you'd ask yourself, what's a little kid going to do to save me from my brother? My twin brother is, a grandfather by this point. He's a strong guy. I don't know what, from the face of it, I don't know what a child is going to do to help. But again, in the rabbi's mind, this is because Joseph has powers, and his very entrance into the world allows for Jacob to feel confident that he can defeat him. So keep that in mind as we go through this story, and what Joseph means now to the family. Okay.
About this time, Rebekah sent her nurse Deborah, the daughter of Uz, accompanied by 2 of Isaac's servants, to Jacob to urge him to return to his father's house, now that his 14 years of service had come to an end. Then Jacob approached Laban and spoke, "Give me my wives and my children, that I may go unto mine own place and to my country, for my mother has sent messengers to me, bidding me to return to my father's house." Laban answered, saying, "Oh, that I might find favor in your eyes. By a sign it was made known to me that God blesses me for your sake." What Laban had in mind was the treasure he had found on the day Jacob came to him, and he considered that a token of his beneficent powers. Indeed, God had wrought many a thing in the house of Laban that testified to the blessings spread abroad by the pious. Shortly before Jacob came, a pest had broken out among Laban's cattle, and with his arrival, it ceased. And Laban had had no son, but during Jacob's sojourn in Haran, sons were born to him.
Right. So let's explain what happens in that scene. First of all, let's go all the way back to the beginning, which is Rebekah has a nurse we read about named Deborah. Now, Deborah seems to be a fairly minor character, except she is referred to later on in the book of Genesis when she dies. And it is interesting because she seems to be with them the reason that we know she's with them is because she dies and they bury her, and her burial place becomes a shrine, if you will. So what we have to do is we have to explain who this woman is and why she's important. So according to the Midrash, she is almost like a nurse to Jacob, and I assume Esau too, but that she's part of the family, really. And so Rebecca entrusts her with this important mission of bringing her son back. And why? Because it's 14 years, and the time for him to be away is over. So this happens at around the same time Joseph's born, which again means Joseph is squarely, 14, 15, 16 years younger than his rest of his brothers around that time, right? They're teenagers when he's born, which means that by the time he's 17, which is when he gets into trouble with them, they're in their 30s. So this is, keep this in mind when we're getting to the Joseph stories. And again, as long as Jacob was with Laban, all these great things were happening. So Laban does not want him to go away. Not only does he have better luck as far as his flocks, but what's important is that he actually has sons, because we know he has daughters. Laban wanted to have sons to keep on the family business. And of course, we're going to see daughters can leave the house, and he wanted to make sure that his house continued. So as long as Jacob was there, things were happening so good for him that he actually had finally had sons during this time. So what, of course, is interesting about this is that his new sons, his new sons would have been the age of his grandchildren. Remember, folks, Laban is not a good person. I mean, we know that. We know that from the very beginning. But we have another problem here, folks, which is that Laban, no matter what, is our grandfather. Laban's also related, obviously, he's Abraham's nephew, or grandnephew. But the point is that he's our family. Laban is as bad as he is, he's still part of the family. You can't undo that. You can't forget that. So even though, again, he's going to treat his son-in-law, our ancestor, our father, Jacob, terribly, the reality is that he still is our grandfather. So keep that in mind also as we're reading about Laban this week. This is really the time that we're going to be reading about Laban.
I spent third.
Yeah.
I did.
All right.
With some of the original cast.
The whole original cast.
Oh, I thought it was.
All right, let's go.
All the hire he asked in return for his labor, and for the blessings he had brought Laban, was the speckled and spotted among the goats of his herd, and the black among the sheep. Laban assented to his conditions, saying, "Behold, I would it might be according to your word." The arch villain Laban, whose tongue wagged in all directions, and who made all sorts of promises that were never kept, judged others by himself, and therefore suspected Jacob of wanting to deceive him. And yet, in the end, it was Laban himself who broke his word. No less than 100 times he changed the agreement between them. Nevertheless, his unrighteous conduct was of no avail. Though a 3-day journey had been set between Laban's flocks and Jacob's, the angels were wont to bring the sheep belonging to Laban down to Jacob's sheep, and Jacob's droves grew, constantly larger and better. Laban had given only the feeble and sick to Jacob, yet the young of the flock, raised under Jacob's tendance, were so excellent in quality that people bought them at a heavy price, and Jacob had no need to resort to the peeled rods.
You want to
Yes.
stop there? We'll talk about the peeled
Okay.
rods.
He
So,
had,
yeah.
finish it.
No. Well, let's look at the peeled rods first, because we'll take a look at the Torah, because the Torah goes into this very long description of how Jacob is able to increase his flocks, and it seems like, again, a lot of let me get to this. A lot of description on a scene that on the face of it, like, why is this in the Torah? And the rabbis recognized that. They knew that this scene was very detailed. Hold it 1 second. Let me get to the sharing part of this. Wait a second. Okay. Let me somehow. Okay. Let's look at the Torah. We're going to look at Genesis. Too much here. Okay. Genesis chapter 30. So let us go down to the story. So the way the story in Genesis gives it to us, when Laban says to Jacob, what shall I pay you when you leave? If you do this thing for me, let me pasture your flocks. Let me pasture your flock, removing from every speckled and spotted animal, every dark colored sheep, and every spotted and speckled goat. Such shall be my wages. So on the face of what Jacob does here, it seems as though he's going to get the least attractive sheep and goat that he's going to take as his wages. So he basically sets Laban up into a situation where Laban really can't say no, because he's basically saying, I'll take the stuff you don't want. And then, I mean, if there's any question, in the future, when you go over my wages, let my honesty toward you testify for me. If there are any among my goats that are not speckled or spotted, or any sheep that are not dark colored, they got there by theft. And Laban said, very well, let it be as you say. But that same day, he removed the streaked and spotted he-goats and all the speckled and spotted she-goats, every one that had white on it, and all the dark-colored sheep, and left them in charge of his sons. So basically, Laban says, you know what? I'm going to not let him have any speckled sheep because I'm going to take them all out. I'm going to take them all out. And then he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob while Jacob was pasturing the rest of Laban's flock. Jacob then got fresh shoots of poplar, of almond and plane, peeled white stripes in them, laying bare the white of the shoots. The rods that he peeled, he set up in front of the goats in the troughs, the water receptacles that the goats came to drink from. Their mating occurred when they came to drink. Okay. And since the goats mated by the rods, the goats brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted young. But Jacob dealt separately with the sheep. He made those animals face the streaked or white, dark-colored animals in Laban's flock, and so he produced special flocks for himself, which he did not put with Laban's flocks. Moreover, when the sturdier animals were mating, Jacob would place the rods in the troughs in full view of the animals so that they mated by the rods. But with the feebler animals, he would not place them there. Thus the feeble ones went to Laban and the sturdy to Jacob. So the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks, maidservants, camels, and asses. So, and that's the end of chapter 30, but it really doesn't end that, because he says, now he heard the things that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken all our father, that is our father's, and that which our fathers, he has built up all his wealth, this wealth. Jacob also saw that Laban's manner toward him was not as it had been in the past. So let's go back now to the Midrash, and you'll see why it talks about, again, Jacob had no need to resort to the peeled rods. So Jacob's, the description in the Torah of these rods that somehow create a genetic, this genetic anomaly in the flock is, the rabbis dismiss it out of hand right away. They basically say he didn't need to do that. There was no need to resort to this. Why are they saying this? Well, probably because the rabbis recognize that what Jacob seems to be doing here sounds a lot like some kind of weird folk witchcraft kind of thing. I mean, honestly, it seems like
Certainly superstition.
Yeah, it's some weird superstition, and the rabbis aren't they're not comfortable with it, because again, it seems to show that Jacob doesn't have enough faith that God will provide him with what he needs. the bottom line is this, and people have pointed this out since we've known a little bit about genetics. Jacob, you can see what Jacob is doing in this, which is that he realizes that just because an animal is speckled or spotted, that doesn't necessarily mean that the children of the animal will be speckled and spotted. And the most important thing to look at is not the outside of what the coloration looks like, but let's look at whether the animal is healthy or not. Let's look at whether the animal looks like it's a sturdy animal, and let's not worry about what color it is. So what he basically did is the Torah tells us that the secret is that he really didn't look at the physical imperfections on the outside of the animal and looked at whether the animal was healthy or not, which of course is, again, the colors change through recessive genes, and so Jacob understood that you could have a healthy animal, or you could have a healthy animal by breeding other healthy animals, and however they come out color-wise, the important thing is that they're healthy, that they're sturdy animals. So it's an interesting, the Midrash is kind of explaining it in a way that will allow Jacob not to be a superstitious warlock, but it's also basically telling us that, for people in the ancient world who were trying to figure out genetic engineering, they had some rudimentary knowledge of how to create a good herd. So let's take a look back at our text, and that's the peeled rods business, which, as you can see, takes up quite a few lines of Torah. Considering other things, we get hardly anything. It's quite a lot. All right.
He had but to speak, and the flocks bore according to his desire. What Laban deserved was utter ruin for having permitted the pious Jacob to work for him without hire. And after his wages had been changed 10 times, and 10 times, Laban had tried to overreach him. God rewarded him in this way. But his good luck with the flocks was only what Jacob deserved. Every faithful laborer is rewarded by God in this world, quite regardless of what awaits him in the world to come. With empty hands, Jacob had come to Laban, and he left with herds numbering 600,000. Their increase had been marvelous, and an increase that will be equaled only in the Messianic time.
Now, what's interesting about the Midrash that we just read is that there seems to be an interesting theological point that is made in this Midrash, which is that a person who is a good laborer is rewarded by God in this world. Regardless of what awaits them in the world to come, if you're a good laborer, a faithful laborer in this world, you deserve in this world. So it's not just, he had a rough life, so he should have it in the next world. The rabbis, at least here, are saying it's not the case. If you're a hard worker and you work in this world, you deserve reward in this world.
But isn't it also to going back, like the haves and have-nots? Doesn't it make the people that have to work for a living instead of studying feel like, oh, we'll get rewarded too?
Yeah, absolutely. And the rabbis do that a lot in the midrashic in midrashic texts and Talmudic texts. In this period, the rabbis really do stress that hard work will be rewarded in this world. They don't discount or diminish the work that we do with our hands or with our life as unimportant. When I say ein kemach, ein Torah, ein kemach. If you don't have a livelihood, you can't have Torah, and if you don't have Torah, you can't have a livelihood. But they go hand in hand. It's not like one is necessarily better than the other. And they recognize that you needed to have, economic security in order to have the studies. And so again, it's not always the case today, in some religious communities, but there was in the rabbinic period this understanding that, hey, we got work to do in this world, and we're gonna work hard at it. And there was that sense that, maybe life is hard, maybe life's a struggle, but there can be a reward in this world. I mean, that's the Tevye, the Tevye story is, I'm going to work hard, but maybe I can have
maybe I can earn a living for my family, and in that work is something that is, I deserve to have financial security and to have a day where I, at least on Shabbos, where I feel like a king. So this is an idea in Judaism. It's not just, deferred, gratification in the world to come. So you do see this in a lot of cases, but obviously they're saying what Jacob went through, he ended up having this amazing reward while he was working for him, so much so that, again, you almost have to go to the Messianic era to have this type of reward, which again reminds us the Messianic era isn't a time when you stop enjoying things. That the Messianic era is really a time when you don't have to worry about enjoying those things, and that you get a lot of reward for your work. And it's not, maybe it's basically, it's heaven on earth. It's not that it's heaven, it's that it's heaven on earth. And so that you do work and you do have herds, but it's just, you get to be like Jacob got to be during his time with Laban, which is really, really successful. So Laban's, the interesting thing here is that Laban's success had been dependent on Jacob. Jacob's now ready to go, and Laban is realizing that when he goes, I'm going to lose my lucky charm. I'm going to lose my ability to continue to succeed. And as you see in the Torah, it's very clear in the Torah, at least, that Laban does have sons. Now, it could be that those are grandsons. Those are men in his household that are, that are kind of, will be his heirs. But it does seem that Laban has a family and is thinking about what's going to happen to his family when Jacob leaves, with his part of his family too, his grandsons through his daughters. And so this is the Torah recognizes that, the Torah tells us this, and the rabbis are going to talk about this in great detail. So let's take a look at what happens here.
The wealth and good fortune of Jacob called forth the envy of Laban and his sons, and they could not hide their vexation in their intercourse with him. And the Lord said to Jacob, your father-in-law's countenance is not toward you as before time, and yet you tarriest with him. Do you rather return to the land of your fathers, and there I will let my Shekhinah rest upon you, for I cannot permit the Shekhinah to reside outside the Holy Land. Immediately, Jacob sent the fleet messenger Naphtali to Rachel and Leah to summon them to a consultation. And he chose as the place of meeting an open field where none could overhear what was said.
Yeah, so let's, there's a couple things in that Midrash. The first is that we have this kind of understanding that Naphtali is fast. Well, he's represented by the deer. That's his what do they call them in
Spirit animal.
Yeah, spirit. I was looking for the
Totem.
Thing and they use in
Totem.
snow in Game of Thrones. They're I can't remember what it's called. Anyways, gives an ass. Anyways, it's not signet. Anyways, Naphtali is a deer and he's fleet, and so
Could it be a familiar?
Yeah, no, it's I don't think it's. Anyways, it's the logo. So Naphtali is the fleet foot, and so Jacob sends him out, and the Torah literally says right here in chapter 31, verse 4. Oh, so God said to Jacob, let's talk about that too. The Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers where you were born, and I will be with you. So the Torah says that specifically. And so again, the understanding here is that there's a way that God is with him in the land of Israel, that he can't be with him like this in Aram, in Syria. So the Midrash says, the Shekhinah, the divine presence that's going to protect you and be with you, will not be with you in another land. It has to only be in the land of Israel. So this is this weird idea that the Shekhinah only really abides in the land of Israel, which is interesting because we seem to have the Shekhinah or some kind of divine presence that is with the Israelites when they're coming back from Egypt. But
Is there a distinction between the Shekinah and the Holy Spirit?
well, it does seem like there is, because we're going to read specifically in here that the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, which we do have references to the Bible, but really much more in rabbinic literature than, of course, in the Christian Bible. We have it all over the place, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit. It does seem to be different than the Shekhinah, because the Shekhinah seems to be, whereas the Ruach HaKodesh seems to be like something that comes over you. The Shekhinah seems to be like a presence that's with you all the time, or if it's not with you all the time, it's the land of Israel all the time. So it's almost like something that is much more corporal, that's literally something you can touch or see, whereas the Ruach HaKodesh is more like the Spirit that animates and is like the breath of God, which is very powerful, but seems to come and go and doesn't seem to necessarily manifest itself or be present or be able to be seen all the time. So it is strange, because we'll have that phrase. We will have that phrase today. We'll have the Ruach HaKodesh. We'll have that phrase in here. And so there is a different word that's used, and it seems to be different. It doesn't seem to be the same thing. I mean, there's similarities in that they're both ways that human beings sense the presence of God, but they don't seem to be the same.
The Shekinah is more corporal.
Yeah. And it's something that I think, whereas the Shekhinah, my best reference for what the Shekhinah is that's what's running around at the end of Indiana Jones, where that's the Shekhinah, which, as you can see, can also kind of be a little scary, which, by the way, I thought it was interesting that they really did use kind of a feminine ghost presence for the Shekhinah in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Shekhinah is definitely a feminine form of God. It's a feminine noun. The Ruach HaKodesh seems to be a little bit more gentle, or like a whisper. So it's not as maybe frightening either as the Shekhinah can manifest itself. Not that the Shekhinah we're scared of, but it does seem like it's something to really be reckoned with.
Intense.
And it doesn't seem to be something you want to either come into contact with without permission, without, you don't want to accidentally come into contact with. I mean, not that it's easy. It's not easy to come in contact with Shekhinah, but it seems to be something pretty strong force. So Jacob is told by God to return to the land, and then it says specifically, Jacob had Rachel and Leah called to the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father's manner towards me is not as it has been in the past, but the God of my father has been with me. It's interesting, by the way, too. He still doesn't call him my God. He says, God of my father. And as you know, I've served your father, with all my might, but your father has cheated me, changing my wages time and again. Now, it doesn't say here 100 times, but it does say many times. God, however, would not let him do me harm. So then we go through this speckled thing again. And here's the key part, which we're going to get some more definition on in the Midrash. God has taken away your father's livestock and given it to me. And here Jacob says, once at the mating time of the flock, I had a dream in which I saw that the he-goats mating with the flocks were streaked, speckled, and mottled. And in the dream, an angel of God said to me, Jacob. Here, I answered, Hineni. So here's Jacob's Hineni moment. Doesn't seem, by the way, nearly as crucial or vital as it is for his father and Moses and people later on. And he said, note well that all the he-goats which are mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, and mottled, for I have noted all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise and leave this land and return to your native land. So that's what Jacob, he he shares his vision, his divine vision, with his wives, which, by the way, only 2 of his wives. He doesn't, Bilhah and Zilpah aren't there. But okay, so Rachel and Leah are there. He tells them the story. He tells them backstory that we haven't heard yet, by the way, that he actually doesn't come up with these. He doesn't come up with this plan on his own. It's actually God's angel that's been helping him. The interesting thing, too, is that the angel seems to be speaking to him and reminding him, again, in the words of, this is God speaking, but I am the God who you spoke to in the latter vision when you left the land. And again, God says, I've noted all that Laban has been doing to you. So God has taken account of it. God knows what's been happening. But there really does seem to be a sense here that Jacob has not been, in the Torah, that Jacob and God have not been communicating a lot while he's been away. Really, if you look at this on the face of it, it doesn't seem like Jacob and God have been talking a lot. Why? Because God needs to reintroduce himself or itself to Jacob here. If they've been talking all along, why would God need to say this? And so it seems interesting that this is kind of the theological relationship, if you will, that Jacob has with God is going to be reestablished now as he's about to leave. Now, here's the interesting thing, that Rachel and Leah say to him, have we a share in the inheritance of our father's house? So what does this mean to us, Jacob? Surely he regards us as outsiders now that he has sold us and has used up our purchase price. Truly, all the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, do just as God has told you. So he gets his wife's permission and encouragement to do what he's about to do. Now, there's a couple things that the Torah is basically giving us a sense of, which is that when Jacob is about to leave, he needs to have their buy-in in this. That's what the Torah basically just said. He has this conference with them in the field. And it's their agreement to be part of this, which again is necessary for what's about to unfold. Now, I guess you could say, well, maybe Jacob is worried that they'll tell Laban, that they'll go to their dad and say, hey, he's about to leave and he's taking all this stuff with. So maybe that's part of it. But it seems as though either Jacob didn't know or Jacob very well knew that the daughters were fed up with him too. And it seems as though it's not really about Jacob. It seems as though their issue is really about what they're going to inherit. As much as maybe they want to support and be with their husband, it seems to be a lot about their own well-being. Because they say, truly all the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. They don't say it belongs to you. It says, it's all theirs. It's their families. But they do say us. They do say it. They say us. And so there is this recognition that, hey, this stuff is ours. We're gonna take our stuff. When we go, we're gonna take our stuff and we're gonna get out of here. So again, keep this in mind. This is in the Torah. The Torah gives us that Rachel and Leah are fully buying into this. So let's read what happens.
His 2 wives approved the plan of returning to his home, and Jacob resolved at once to go away with all his substance, without as much as acquainting Laban with his intention. Laban was gone to shear his sheep, and so Jacob could execute his plan without delay. That her father might not learn about their flight from his teraphim, Rachel stole them, and she took them and concealed them upon the camel upon which she sat, and she went on. And this is the manner they used to make the images. They took a man who was the firstborn, slew him, and took the hair off his head, then salted the head and anointed it with oil. Then they wrote the name on a small tablet of copper or gold and placed it under his tongue. The head with the tablet under the tongue was then put in a house where lights were lighted before it. And at the time when they bowed down to it, it spoke to them on all matters that they asked of it. And that was due to the power of the name which was written upon it.
Now,
Creepy.
I showed you said thing, and I'm going to show it to you again right now because it is very creepy. You're absolutely right. So give me 1 second as I show you the teraphim, and you can see why we think that this is what they looked like. And by the way, when the rabbis wrote about this, they clearly had a little bit more connection to it than we did. They had a little closer. It was a little bit closer in history, but we didn't really know what they were talking about until we started doing some excavations. Does everybody see the teraphim?
This is monstrous.
Yeah.
It's
So
like head hunting.
yeah. Now,
Human sacrifice.
yes.
Right.
So when we read this, when we read about the teraphim in the Bible, they seem to be idols. There's really no explanation for why they're so powerful. The rabbis knew what they look like because, again, they're writing it 400, 500, 600 years, maybe even in some cases a couple hundred years after this practice was being done. We know that at a certain point in ancient Israel, this practice, we don't find these, that we can't carbon date them much further back than 300 or 400 BCE, 500 BCE, maybe even. So they were already not in practice during the time of the rabbis, but they probably were still being found, or they were still lying around. They were occasionally uncovered. But for a very long time, we didn't know exactly what these teraphim were, except we had the Midrash about it. And then we also had, later on, in about 100 years ago, when this one, I think, was excavated by Kathleen Kenyon, who was the British woman who excavated Jericho, and she was one of the great archaeologists. She was also a notorious anti-Semite, but she was a wonderful archaeologist and very smart, very accomplished woman, a little bit of an Indiana Jones woman. She excavated, she was a racist on all fronts, really. It wasn't just anti-Semitism, but she was a British scholar who did give us some really good insights into the Canaanite practices. And so this was one of those skulls that was found where, again, we can see by what they did is they took a skull, they plastered it, they used shells and sometimes jewels for the eyes. And they believed, we can tell from the Midrash and from the way these things are preserved, that they held them in esteem and put them in a shrine and would use them for communication. Well, we read about mandrakes last week, about hallucinogens that people were ingesting. So it's very possible that if you ingest some hallucinogens and have a skull on your mantle, that you can make that teraphim, you can make that teraph speak to you.
Did you ever read, well, I think it was called Good Death? And there is a community in South America, and I don't remember where, but a woman there has just a whole hut full of heads, and people come and talk to the heads, and they dress them and jewel them, and it's also something that's practiced in some communities even today.
Yeah, you can listen. You can understand why. I mean, this is the center, the place of community. I mean, that's our
the way we communicate is through our head. So, I mean, look, you can see it in Hamlet, you know, with Yorick, and you can see it in other forms of storytelling where people use a skull to kind of make a point that this is, you know, this was a person once. There's actually other places in the Talmud where we talk about, you know, seeing a skull and kind of reflecting on who that person was. I mean, you can do that when you see a femur or two or a large bone where you realize was probably a person, but a skull, a human skull, is obviously where we really see that there was a person there. And so you can understand, you know, from a basic anthropological kind of basic human level, why a skull would provide that kind of fascination. But obviously you can see in the Midrash that there was a ritual attached to it, which was human sacrifice. So it wasn't just that the person died of old age or, you know, was a wise person who was well respected, but that they actually caused people to be a tariff by what they did to them in this in the world before they went into the next world, if you will, which again required human sacrifice. So it's a horrific, you know, as Marina said, this is a horrific horrific thing that people would do. As I mentioned before, when we looked at the tariff, there is a Anne Rice book called Servant of the Bones, which is about a Jewish person who is put through the process of being turned into a genie by having his bones, he's murdered, and he has to become a genie for people by the way he's murdered and kept in his bones. So it is she was basing this on other rituals that we knew about. What's so strange about this ritual, folks, is that the ritual included using the divine name, which tells us that the rabbis believe that the divine name, Yud He Vav He, the 4 letters of Hebrew, can be used in a way magically to do dark magic as well. And so when the Bible talks about not using God's name in vain, the rabbis understand this to mean these types of rituals. And we have cases of this in the Talmud of rabbis warning against people using divine name for magic. There's a story that Balaam uses God's name for magic. Why is that a possibility? Because the Bible tells us that Balaam and God talk. And so Balaam knows God. Does he use God's name in vain for magic? So it says that Balaam ends up flying around using God's name. Again, the versions of this are used, you know, permutations of God's name are used in Kabbalistic rituals very carefully, but, you know, kind of secretly, in creating a golem. And so the golem is created either by the divine name or by different Hebrew letters. But this idea that the name has power is something that the rabbis assume to be true. There's no question that they believe it has power and that it can be used by people. Look, we don't know, by the way, whether the Balaam story that we have in the Talmud is also possibly a veiled reference to Jesus, because there is a stream in rabbinic literature where we believe that maybe if the rabbis have a kind of a rudimentary knowledge of Jesus, very rudimentary, by the way, doesn't seem like they really understood or had the Gospels in front of them in some cases. But it seems like when people would come to them and say, well, there's stories about Jesus doing miracles in God's name, they would say simply, yes, but not anybody, but if you're a powerful sorcerer, you can use God's name. It can be used by people in the wrong way, that simply by using God's name, you can make miracles and you can do powerful things. That doesn't mean you're supposed to do it. On the contrary, you're not supposed to do it, but it can be done. there is an understanding that this can be done, that magic can be done using God's name. So keep that in mind when we read Midrash and when we read rabbinic sources. The rabbis don't dispute the efficacy of magic. They just say you shouldn't do it. That's their take on it. So keep that in mind again when we come to parts of the Bible that have magic in them. Again, this also makes it a little bit creepier, maybe, what Rachel does when she steals them and sits on them. But it also kind of makes sense that she could sit on a skull rather than a whole big idol, large idol, which in the other parts of the Bible, we see the teraphim are really almost full scale. Now, it could be human full.
Could be children,
It is
small
yes,
teraphim.
It could be very, very strange usage of these idols. And again, and for magic, it could be that again, sometimes the head was placed on some other type of inanimate object, and this was also part of a teraph, was that they put it on some kind of mounting as well. All of these are possibilities, and again, the rabbis seem to be telling us, I mean, you're not supposed to do this, but people did it.
Could they have just been pagan things to begin with, and by putting the name of God under the tongue would somehow sanctify it?
Could be, but it seems as though this was something that's done. When the rabbis tell this story, they're telling it to you that this wasn't done one time, right? So this is something,
Right.
This is the way they did it. This is the manner they used to make the images. So we assume that it happened frequently. It could be that, again, yes, it's a version of these things that took pagan rituals and then corrupted them or improvised on them or even made them more powerful. But the interesting thing about this is that the people who are doing this are not Israelites, or they're not Jews, or they're not from Jacob's tribe. But the problem is Jacob's wife, Rachel, believes in their power. She, there's one possibility which we actually don't get a lot of, which is that Rachel just wants to mess her dad up, just piss him off.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't believe they work, but she's just going to piss him off. I'm going to take his idols, and I'm just going to piss him off. But that doesn't really seem to be the intent. It doesn't seem to be what happens in the scene. And the rabbis seem to be willing to accept that Rachel sees that there's, they're efficacious, that they actually work. So this is part of the problem, again, with Rachel, is that she doesn't seem to just be doing this to screw with her dad's head, but that she actually thinks that they may have power, and that if she has them, that she'll have that power. But again, it seems to be that this is something that was commonly done, and that if you had these idols, you had that person's power. You took their power with you when you took those idols. So how many times did it happen that they put the actual name under it? It seems as though it was done more than once, that it wasn't just a one-time occurrence, that they took God's name and put it underneath a tariff. And this is like, God, guys, we know that the Israelites were using these because we read about them again. This is one of those stories that makes an appearance in the story of David, of King David. In the book of Samuel, we read about how Michal uses a tariff in her family's home, in King Saul's home, who's a great king by the standard of, he's chosen by God, he's a Messiah, he's at least for a time loved by God. And it doesn't seem like the tariff that he had in his house was what pissed God off. It's other stuff. It's not killing the Amalekites. It's not that he had a tariff. So these teraphim seem to have been accepted, used, part of what Israelites were doing. And again, maybe they didn't always, maybe they bought them, maybe they didn't create them, but there does seem to be this problem. The Israelites are into these things. So, I got to tell you, when you read this, the rabbis aren't taking away, they're not reducing the horrific idea that our ancestors participated in these rituals, or at least use these things, which is if you buy it, you're supporting the market. You can't claim that you didn't help create the problem if you're buying it. So think about that when we're reading these stories where they're troubling, and the rabbis are not going to make it less troubling. The situation with the Trophim, as we're going to see again.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
according to Josephus, he said that people would carry them when they journey to foreign lands.
Yeah, and Josephus is living at the time of the rabbi, so he's
Right.
he's writing at a time when these are still not ancient history, and he's dealing with idolatry. He's, by the way, not for the most part, he's not dealing with these kinds of things with human heads. By the Roman period, the Romans were not really big into these kind of things. They liked idols. They oftentimes looked at these kinds of human sacrifices and these rituals as kind of old style paganism. And they knew that they did it in their own culture, but it wasn't normal. It wasn't normal Roman behavior in the sense that that's not the way they killed lots of people, but they didn't generally keep dead bodies around and put them on display. So I think when, Josephus is talking about this, he actually is not referring to the head. He's referring to the other possibility that the Trophim were idols that people took with them on journeys, which they did take on journeys, and which they did invoke, especially on journeys, because those were dangerous, dangerous times when people went on journeys. And they did take idols with them on journeys. You see a little bit of that, by the way, in the movie Gladiator, with the idols that Maximus takes with him. He takes this bag of idols representing his family. That either his family's energy is in these idols, but they're little tiny idols. Look, it seems as though these idols are definitely, no matter what, they're transportable because Rachel is sitting on top of them. But it could be, again, that Josephus in his mind is talking about the idols that were more common in the Roman era, which were more representational idols, and I don't want to say less functional, because they were functional, but they were less necessarily, pieces of a bone or pieces of, that necessarily had to be like, this is a human. Sometimes the Roman idols, and that was actually in the movie, they don't exactly look, they don't have to look exactly like a person. Sometimes simply a stone with a person's name on it was enough to kind of be something that you would carry as memento in Roman societies.
That movie certainly gave me an insight into paganism and an understanding and appreciation that I never had before. I was impressed with that.
Yeah, and I think that was Ridley Scott's intent was to not make paganism look silly. And
Right.
look, the reality is that we know that especially in some forms of Christian veneration, parts of saints were preserved.
Oh yeah.
As and you can see them all. And it's not just saints. They kept Galileo's finger is on display in a museum in Italy, in Florence.
Rabbi,
people liked having a piece of the person's body around because they believed it gave them some protection.
It's like people who keep ashes of a loved one on their mantle. It's not much different than that.
Absolutely.
a couple things, Rabbi. First, I had a idol once, and his name was Billy. But what I'm asking is, when Josephus is saying this, is he saying this about the Hebrews?
Oh, he's recognizing that Rachel was stealing idols. Oh, I mean, you have to. The Torah says so. So he's explaining it. Josephus is trying to not whitewash Rachel's thing, her theft. Rachel's reason for taking them at that moment was because they were going on a journey. I mean, you and I would say, so what? She still took idols. But Josephus, I think, is actually tipping his hand a little bit here, which is that he's telling us that during the Roman period, Jews were still a little bit reliant on idolatry, and in a way that Josephus is recognizing was really common. So when Josephus is saying this, he's actually telling us, hey, you know what? You know what we're talking about here. He's only relating it to what people in his day would know, which is, oh, you know what Rachel was doing? She was taking that idol that you take with you when you go on a journey. Look, we know because the Talmud talks about it. The Talmud talks about it. We read it actually when we studied Avodah Zarah, the tractate on idol worship in the Talmud. There's a whole tractate on it in the Talmud. And what the Talmud is concerned about in their day, in the time of Josephus, in the time of the Midrash, the type of idolatry that's really popular amongst Jews at the time is exactly this. People who are going on journeys who take little idols with them or who do something else. When they come to a special place on the road, they place a stone in that shrine so that they can get blessed on their way. And these piles of stones were a recognition that gods somehow see that stone as an offering, as a recognition that you are paying homage and recognizing the power that God had. And specifically the God that they would do this with, because the Talmud tells us, is Mercury, the god of journey, of people going on journeys. So the Talmud talks about these stone piles that would be on the side of the road. And Jews were clearly participating in this ritual. Now look, you could have been just the guy who said, you know what does it hurt? I'm going to throw a little stone on the side of the road on my journey. And, you know, if Mercury really does, you know, if he does help you on a journey, what does it hurt
It makes religion, it seems to me, seem at least primarily or basically very idolatrous.
Yeah, well, it really was. And it took a long time.
Well, maybe it still is.
Well, when you realize how much it was, you realize how far we've come. Because if you couldn't go on a journey in ancient Israel 2,000 years ago without placing a stone by the side of the road when you are turning off in a different direction, I mean, that's pretty wild. I mean, it's because the Romans did it. And the Romans, and look, some of the Roman rituals were preserved by Christians, but not every Roman ritual. And this ritual of, look, there are shrines, by the way. There were for centuries and centuries all over Europe. There were shrines at junctions, and the shrine would be a statue of Mary, or, you know, there'd be some type, or Jesus and Mary. And people would make kind of like a prayer at that place because they want to be blessed on their journey. But look, they did that because journeys were so scary and
inherently dangerous.
Maybe they're about to get scary again. But people wanted to be prepared on their journey, to have all their ducks in a row, to have everything that they needed to do when they set off on a perilous journey, which could have been going 20 miles, could have been a perilous journey. So I think when you think about why they did it, you understand they were really scared. But the fact that these rituals were so commonplace, and again, if you're a Jew living in the Roman era, I'm talking before the Romans become Christians, if the Romans are all doing it and they seem to be really good at creating roads and journeys, and you're sitting there as a Hebrew going, how the heck did the Romans get to my country and build a whole civilization, you know, their whole model of their own Rome in my backyard, which they did in Jerusalem, and they did in Caesarea, and they did in all. You say, hey, maybe the Romans know something. Maybe the Romans are onto something. And when the Romans go traveling, which they do all the time, they put a little stone by the side of the road. Let's do that too. So I don't know that, you know, I'm not making an excuse for it, but you can understand why the Jewish ancestors would have said, you know what, that's not a bad thing just to have, you know, as protection. And again, the rabbis didn't like it. They wrote about it because it was happening. And Rachel, so to answer your question, Mike, Josephus knew exactly what he was talking about, because it was very common in his day for Jews to blend a little bit of the Roman blessings to Mercury, or maybe to Fortuna, or to Nike, or some of those gods that you go, hey, you know what, let me just take what you know, I'll increase my chances. You know, next time I go to Vegas, I'm gonna, you know, whatever. You know, people get a lucky rabbit's foot.
Rabbi, is that why we say a prayer before we take a long journey now? Is that?
Oh yeah, we have for a long time to say the traveler's prayer. The traveler's prayer is a prayer that we say when we go on a journey, asking God to help protect us on a journey. But yeah, I mean, it's a very old tradition. I would say that, today, in reality, we're a lot less nervous about, I mean, some of us have phobias and fears about getting into going on a long journey or going on a drive. I mean, there's people who don't want to go on freeways. But generally speaking, our means of travel, and our roadways are so much safer than they used to be that we don't think about it. I mean, we really don't. We get in a car, we drive down the road, and we feel pretty safe. I mean, we realize you can get an accident, God forbid, all those kinds of things that can happen when we're on the road. But we realize that we take it for granted that our journeys are safe. But it was very common in the ancient world that people knew that there was so much that could go wrong on the journey. You run out of food, you run out of water, you get attacked by bandits, you get sick on the road.
And in this life, aren't we looking for magic as well?
We are, but you're right.
Right now.
But we don't think about we usually don't think about it when we do these things that we take for granted today. But you're right, we do now, and I think we're about to probably have a whole bunch more fears about traveling.
But not just travel. I think aren't we looking for something magic, some magic bullet that's going to get us out of this? Will be something that will appear. I mean, maybe it's not Lysol or bleach, but it's going to be something.
Yeah.
Well, we always do that. That's human nature. You want
It
it,
is.
you want it fixed. You want the magic pill
Right.
that's going to drop 40 pounds, and you want
I want that one.
The difference today is that we look towards science to give us those magic pills. I mean, in some ways, we also recognize that it's out of our control by saying, well, a doctor is going to fix it for us. There'll be a scientist or a group of scientists that will come up with these cures. But number one, we recognize that, or we believe that it's in our power. So we believe that we have the power to do it. And I think there's a certain understanding that we have today. Most of us, I think, theologically don't want to say that we're being punished right now by our current circumstances by God, and that God is going to fix it for us. I mean, we'd say, hey, listen, maybe if we listen to our better selves, we take better care of ourselves or do what we need to do to stay healthy. And that maybe God will, God has given us the abilities, given us the wisdom to figure out how to cure these diseases. And if we spent less time, developing, better sugar substitutes and more time, figuring out how to go after viruses, that, maybe we would not even be in this situation. So, again, the easy thing is to say also, weapons and all the other things that we do that aren't necessarily life affirming, but those are probably our theological answers today. But I think you're right. No, I mean, Reverend Lynn, you're right. People are going to be looking for those, they're going to look for that magic.
As Judith said, it's sort of human nature.
I think we're a little bit, I do think overall though, we've come a long way from number one, putting everything on God, and number two, saying that human beings haven't, and again, you can make the argument we put too much power into human beings, but we really do recognize that we have to get ourselves out of this problem. And there is not going to be, we can't sit around waiting for the magic to happen, that we're going to go and do it. And, look, for our ancestors, some of that was trying to figure out, hey, we just haven't come up with the right spell yet. We haven't come up with the right incantation. We have to work harder at getting this incantation so that we can get rain, or we can get, saved from this, from this, we haven't had the right people praying for us. We haven't prayed to the right saints yet. We haven't had the right prayer offered yet, that as soon as we do that, then God will finally respond.
Right.
But I think all of us are going to
we have advanced, but
I think we're going to definitely be testing our limits of belief and of, again, how much we're going to put into our responsibility. I hope it's soon though. So let's continue, because I want you to see what happens when the theological context here of I wouldn't even just say theological, the magic continues. Let's put it that way.
The covenant with Laban. Jacob departed and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward Gilead, for the Holy Spirit revealed to him that God would bring help there to his children in the days of Jephthah.
Okay, so pause right there, because I promised you that we would we would get to the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. So that is a strange phrase, but it is one that we occasionally see in the Midrash, which is that God will give us messages through dreams, but also sometimes through the Holy Spirit. And so Jacob is coming back to the land of Israel. He's coming through Gilad, which is in the northern part of Israel from Syria, which is basically the Golan Heights. And so he's coming down through Golan. And in that area later on, during the time of Jephthah, right, Yiftach, who is a problematic character to say the least in the book of Judges, his story is the Iphigenia story where he ends up sacrificing his daughter. But he's a very successful. Oh, and let's not forget, his mother is a prostitute who gives birth to him after his rest of his father's, the rest of his brothers, his half brothers, kick him out of the house. They ask him to come back and fight against the Ammonites. So this area has significance later on, and the rabbis want to remind us of that by telling us that this area is going to be special later on. And the way that Jacob gets that message is through the Ruach HaKodesh, which again, when does he get the Ruach HaKodesh? Is it when he crosses over? It doesn't necessarily mean that he can't get the Ruach HaKodesh in Syria, but he can't get, he's definitely not in the land of Israel proper when the Ruach HaKodesh tells him this. But again, maybe Ruach HaKodesh can come to us outside the land of Israel, but not the Shekhinah. Okay.
Meantime, the shepherds of Haran observed that the well, which had been filled to overflowing since the arrival of Jacob in their place, ran dry suddenly. For 3 days they watched and waited in the hope that the waters would return in the same abundance as before. Disappointed, they finally told Laban of the misfortune, and he divined at once that Jacob had departed from there. For he knew that the blessing had been conferred upon Haran only for the sake of his son-in-law's merits.
So what the Torah tells us is that Jacob left unannounced. He doesn't leave warning his father-in-law. So how does his father-in-law know? Because they run out of water. And so Laban is not going to be happy, but let's take a quick look at what the Torah tells us. It tells us Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household idols. That's all it says about the teraphim in the Torah there. Jacob kept Laban and the Aramean in the dark, which is kind of it's not the literal translation, but again, not telling him anything, that he was leaving, he was fleeing, and fled with all he had. Soon he crossed the Euphrates and headed toward the hill country of Gilad. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. So he took his kinsman with him and pursued him a distance of 7 days, catching up with him in the hill country of Gilad. And again, jumping the gun, but God talks to Laban. But that's not the point we want to get to, is that it says in the Bible that he went 3 days. There's 3 days. And so by the time he finally catches up to him, a week has passed. So let's read what happens when Laban, the way the Torah tells us, we saw God speaks to Laban. Here's the Midrash version. Mm-hmm.
On the morrow, Laban rose early, assembled all the people of the city, and pursued Jacob with the intention of killing him when he overtook him. But the archangel Michael appeared to him and bade him take heed to himself, that he do not the least unto Jacob, else would he suffer death himself. This message from heaven came to Laban during the night, for when in extraordinary cases God finds it necessary to reveal himself to the heathen, He does it only in the dark, clandestinely, as it were, while he shows himself to the prophets of the Jews openly during daylight.
That's
Yeah.
great.
So the rabbis have a real problem with the fact that the Torah says that God spoke to Laban.
Mhm.
So number one, God doesn't speak to Laban. The angel does, which means
Right.
there's a level, he's a level removed. But they really have a problem with Laban. But at the same time, again, the Torah recognizes Laban is who he is. I mean, he is, he's Jacob's father-in-law. So even though he does all these horrible things to Jacob, he's still his father-in-law. The rabbis are going to strip Laban of that ability to talk to God in the same way that God would talk to an Israelite. But again, Laban is from the family of Abraham. So to make the argument doesn't make, it's not hard to understand that Laban would have at least a rudimentary knowledge of God and would have some kind of ability to talk to God, if you will. Rabbis don't want to give that to him. So he gets a dream. So, which, by the way, Jacob got a dream too. Jacob's dream comes to him at night. I want to point out Jacob doesn't get it. So using the rabbi's own commentary there, you could say, yeah, but Jacob only gets a dream at night too.
Yeah, but Jacob and Laban, Jacob's got some sneaky to him.
Of course.
Like his
Of course.
father-in-law.
Oh, no, his
cousin, uncle.
father-in-law is the perfect. This is part of the power of the Torah story. The rabbis actually simplify it in a way, or not simplify it, but they kind of like separate them so much that the irony of this is lost. I mean, the rabbis do point out that, Leah says to Rachel, after she takes Rachel's place, to Jacob, look, you're a trickster. My father's a trickster. And, how can you complain? So there is that recognition in the rabbinic literature that there is that element to Jacob. You can't ignore it. But the Torah, really clear. The Torah really, really doesn't. The Torah is basically, here's one trickster going after another trickster, one con man and another con man. And the question of who's going to con who? Who's going to finally get the final con off? Who's the last grifter? Who's the last grifter standing? It really is in the Torah, which is Jacob is good because he gets the final one. But in reality, it's the Torah even gives it to us. It's God. God's the final one who stops us from spiraling out of control. Yep.
Laban accomplished the journey in one day for which Jacob had taken 7, and he overtook him at the mountain of Gilead. When he came upon Jacob, he found him in the act of praying and giving praise to God. Immediately, Laban fell to remonstrating with his son-in-law for having stolen away unawares to him. He showed his true character when he said, "It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, take heed to yourself, that you speak not to Jacob either good or bad. That is the way of the wicked. They boast of the evil they can do." Laban wanted to let Jacob know that only the dream warning him against doing it was harmful to Jacob, prevented him from carrying out the wicked design he had formed against him. Laban continued to take Jacob to task, and he concluded with the words, "And now, though you would need be gone because you sore long for your father's house, yet why have you stolen my gods?" When he pronounced the last words, his grandchildren interrupted him, saying, "We are ashamed of you, grandfather, that in your old age you should use such words as my gods." Laban searched all the tents for his idols, going first to the tent of Jacob, which was Rachel's at the time, for Jacob always dwelt with his favorite wife. Finding nothing, he went from there to Leah's tent and to the tents of the 2 handmaids. And noticing that Rachel was feeling about here and there, his suspicions were aroused, and he entered her tent a second time. He would now have found what he was looking for if a miracle had not come to pass. The teraphim were transformed into drinking vessels, and Laban had to desist from his fruitless search.
Oh, more magic.
Yeah, keep going.
Now Jacob, who did not know that Rachel had stolen her father's teraphim in order to turn him aside from his idolatrous ways, was angry with Lavan and began to chide with him. The quarrel between them.
Hold it right there. So let's read at least some of the rabbinic takes on what happens here. So there is a possibility, at least the rabbis give us, that Rachel was doing her father a solid
service.
by taking away his idols and trying to sever him from his idolatry. Seems like a little bit of a stretch in that she doesn't seem to be in the mindset of helping him when she leaves, at least according to the Torah. So it doesn't seem to be a really obvious or even logical, if you will, understanding of why she takes the Teraphim. But again, they're trying to give us a possibility, and again, that she's doing something righteous. That's one possibility. That's one midrash. But there's this other idea here that that Laban has Laban has a warranted claim against Jacob, because while Jacob didn't steal the sheep and the goats, he has now stolen the Teraphim. Even though Jacob isn't aware that he's stolen them, he's stolen them. And so this is a problem it's a problem that the Torah kind of sets up. And again, by not really giving us, the Torah doesn't really tell us why she took them, whether she wanted them. I mean, because here's the possibilities. She believed that they were powerful and she wanted them for herself, wanted the magic herself. The other possibility is she knew they were powerful, but she just doesn't want her father to have the power. She's doing it to mess with her father. And there's another possibility which the rabbis give, which is that she just wants to help her father and take away the idols so that he doesn't rely on them anymore. Those are the possibilities that we have. There might be other possibilities as well, but those are the possibilities that the rabbis seem to find here in the story of her stealing the idols. And there are different midrashim which reflect these tendencies. We already read that, again, they seem to have, at least there is a possibility that they actually do work, or they're actually, again, not that they're supposed to use them, but they can actually, they actually are efficacious. So keep that in mind as we're reading this. And as somebody, again, as like Reverend Lynn pointed out, we have more magic, which is that they are turned into drinking vessels. But that's God turning them into drinking vessels, which, by the way, would also allow for them no longer to be idols, because now they're drinking vessels, and Jacob doesn't have these drinking vessels with him at all. But again, keep in mind what's happening in this scene with the search for the idols, because again, that's not what the Bible says happens. So here you have a midrash that almost goes counter to what the Torah itself says, right? Because what does she do? What does she do when she steals them, folks? What does the Torah say she did?
Hid them.
Hid them where?
In
Under
her
her
saddlebags.
mattress, under her.
Under her.
Right.
She refused to get up because she says she is menstruating. I can't get up because I'm in the way of women, is the way the Torah tells us. That's what the Torah says. Well, let's read how the rabbis interpret this.
In the quarrel between them, Jacob's noble character manifested itself. Notwithstanding his excitement, he did not suffer a single unbecoming word to escape him. He only reminded Lavan of the loyalty and devotion with which he had served him, doing for him what none other would or could have done. He said, I dealt wrongfully with the lion, for God had appointed of Lavan's sheep for the lion's daily sustenance, and I deprived him thereof. Could another shepherd have done this? Yes, the people abused me, calling me robber and sneak thief, For they thought that only by stealing by day and stealing by night could I replace the animals torn by wild beasts. And as to my honesty, he continued, it is likely there is another son-in-law who, having lived with his father-in-law, has not taken some little thing from the household of his father-in-law, a knife or other trifle. But you felt about all my stuff. What have you found of all your household stuff? Not so much as a needle or a nail. In his indignation and conscious of his innocence, Jacob exclaimed, with whomever you find the gods, he shall not live. Words which contained a curse. The thief was cursed with premature death, and therefore Rachel had to die in giving birth to Benjamin. Indeed, the curse would have taken effect at once had it not been the wish of God that Rachel should bear Jacob his youngest son.
Ugh. So let's talk about this midrash here. This is the midrash which once you read it, you can never forget it. It's a crazy midrash. This is the curse of Jacob. So this is to me, it's one of the most powerful midrashim that exists because it's a curse that's uttered in, it's like a tragic, almost like a Shakespearean, I don't know, even that, it's this horrible curse that Jacob utters and ends up killing his beloved wife by saying this curse.
Isn't that also Jephthah? Isn't that his daughter, or am I wrong?
No, it's Jephthah's daughter's. That's a vow that he makes,
Yeah, it's the same kind
which
of.
he has to carry out. Yeah, it's a similar idea, carrying out a vow. But in this case, it's even stranger in that Jacob is able to, first of all, utter this curse. I mean, the rabbis pick up on the tragic irony of it, which the Torah gives us, which is that Rachel says, I can't get up because I'm menstruating, and she winds up dying in childbirth. So the irony is, tragic irony is there. But the rabbis go a step further, which is they give us this idea that Jacob literally caused that to happen by saying this, anybody who stole this is going to die. And so he actually causes it to happen.
I thought Joseph was the last of the 12 to be born.
It's Benjamin. And Benjamin
Of course, he was the baby.
We're going to read about Benjamin's birth next. Or
Okay.
not next, but it's next week. We're going to be reading about Benjamin's birth. And again, Rachel, when she dies in childbirth, I mean, she essentially curses her son as well, which the rabbis do pick up on. But you have to, because it's pretty obvious that she says it. But what's so strange about this is that Jacob, again, this is one of those kind of really, maybe it's more of a Greek, I should say Shakespearean, it's really a Greek tragedy that he curses his wife and makes her die through his desire to prove himself, to not be a liar, to not be
Sort of his arrogance. He's arrogant in his righteousness.
Yeah. And the rabbis basically also offer this kind of version of it, which is that Jacob's power would have been immediate if it hadn't been for the fact that she had to give birth to Benjamin. And so she had this role to play in it, which is kind of like, well, why, I guess kind of ask the question, why didn't she die right away? Well, again, the rabbis are playing off of this irony, this thing that's set up in the story. But this idea of using teraphim to trick your father is revisited in the story of Samuel with David, and we'll take a look at that. I don't have time to look at it now. Actually, we should look at it now. But we have a story of a father being tricked with teraphim. And who is it in that story? It is Saul's daughter. And what's so interesting about Saul's daughter, or Saul, Michal, that family, they were from the tribe of Benjamin. A little spooky, right? King Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. So he's from this tribe of Rachel. The connection is Rachel. It's not Jacob. I mean, part of it. Everybody's connected to Jacob, but it's really Rachel and Rachel's descendants. So it's Rachel. Let's take a quick look. It's a story a lot of people don't know. Excuse me. And it's not excuse me. It's not discussed a lot because it is a hold it a second. I gotta get to this. There we go. We're gonna go down. We're gonna go into and we can talk another time about why are the Jacob stories all revisited in the story of King David. Again, some people feel it has to do with the authorship. Some people say that it's because of the thematic connections that the writers of the book of Samuel wanted to make with our ancestors. It's strange because I have to scroll down. Hold a second. Trey, can you close the door? Trey?
Yeah.
Thanks. So I'm going to scroll down here to Shira studying in the other room. Hold it 1 second. Well, let's just take a look. Well, it's not that important. Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin. Here. By the way, look what also is mentioned in the story of Saul, the tomb of Rachel in the territory of Benjamin. It's Zelzah. If you ever wanted to know where the street Zelzah came from, it's a place in Israel.
Huh.
1 second. And we've got to go a little bit further. Sorry. I know there's a way to get to chapters in here. Okay. Let's get to I'm going to get to the story right here. Did I go too far? Hold it a second. Hold it a second. It is a little bit further. 1 second. I know she's in, there's something about it in chapter 14. A second. Again, for people who haven't read the book of Samuel, I really recommend it. It's some of the most powerful writing in the Bible, and it is it makes Game of Thrones look like Mr. Rogers. So I really do recommend it to people to read. If you have to read one other book of the Bible and you like literature, you like writing of exciting and kinds of hold it 1 second. Hold it 1 second. Okay, it's a little bit further. Okay.
Read Samuel and what else?
No, to me, no. The first one and 2 Samuel, first and second books of Samuel, the stories of King David. So here's the story. The story that recalls the Teraphim. So when King Saul goes nuts and starts really hating David, the story tells us an evil spirit of the Lord, Ruach Adonai Ra'ah, which is interesting. The Ruach is used there again, but it's evil spirit came upon Saul while he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing on the lyre. And Saul tried to pin David to the wall with a spear, but he eluded Saul so that he drove the spear into the wall. David fled and got away that night. That night, Saul sent messengers to David's home to keep watch on him to kill him in the morning. So this is the story again that David is he now has got a target on his back. That Saul first tries to spear him, and then when David gets away and doesn't get killed, David, who's married to Michal, Saul's daughter, goes back home to her, and it says Saul sent messengers to keep watching to kill him in the morning. But David's wife Michal said to him, "Unless you run for your life tonight, you will be killed tomorrow." Michal let David down from the window, and he escaped and fled. Michal then took the household idol. Vatikach Michal et hatrafim. It's the same word, which is not always, by the way, the word used for idol. There's other words. Pesalim is the word that's used a lot. A pesal is a idol, usually the word used for idol. This is the word terafim, which they translate as household idol because, again, it seems to imply something different than just a normal idol statue. Laid it on the bed, covered it with a cloth, and at its head she put a net of goat's hair. So here it seems that the idol isn't just a head because it says at its head. So if it was just a head, she wouldn't have maybe had to say its head. Saul sent messengers to seize David, but she said he is sick. Saul, however, sent the messengers back to see David for themselves. Bring him up to me in the bed, and he ordered that he may be put to death. When the messengers came, they found the household idol in the bed with the net of goat's hair at its head. Saul said to Michal, "Why did you play that trick on me and let my enemy get away safely?" "Because," Michal answered Saul, "he said to me, 'Help me get away or I'll kill you.'" By the way, that's a lie. She just lied flat out. But look, she's saving her life. She's saving her husband's life. David made good his escape, and he came to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. That's the important part we just read. Wait, did everybody see that?
And they're never a couple after that again either.
No, well, they do see each other again, but the love isn't there after that. But
Rabbi, you're not sharing, so no, we didn't see that.
Jeez, I'm sorry. I tried to share it. You know what? I want you to see it with your own eyes. So I was actually showing you. When the messengers came, they found the household idol. So I'm circling the word in Hebrew, hatrafim, the idol on the bed. Everybody sees it?
Yeah.
Now you see it. And Saul said, "Why did you play this trick on me and let my enemy get away safely?" So everybody sees you can't read the story of Rachel and her dad without thinking about this story. This has got the Teraphim, it's got the Teraphim, it's got a father being tricked by his daughter, saving the husband against the father.
Yeah, it's new loyalty.
How do you not read this story without thinking about the other story? And here's the thing. We don't know for sure. We don't have proof that the story of Saul and David happened. We really don't. But it does seem like it really happened. The way the story is told and the way that the story is like, it seems like somebody who was there told the story. It doesn't just seem like we're telling you a mythological or ancient story. There seems to be this reportage of literally somebody said, oh yeah, you know what she said? He was going to kill me. So it's not just that it tells us the story, it tells us like the story, the dialogue conveys either reality, like I don't know necessarily somebody wrote down her exact words, but it goes to a deeper level than just, oh, maybe it means this, maybe it means that. I mean, she tells people, you know, what it means. And so I really do think that that story happened. And I think that this story happens or it's told to some extent to give us a precursor, to give us a little taste of what happens with our ancestors and the way this plays out. And that what we're seeing in David's time is really a repetition of what happened to our ancestors. To some extent, not giving David a pass for his behavior and for what happens in his house, but to kind of tell us, you know, these kind of things have happened before. And they not only happened before, but they happened to all of our ancestors. Because Jacob is the ancestor for all the Israelites, the people in the north, and for Jacob, and for Judah and for David. So again, it's interesting that Benjamin is in the story. I mean, the Rachel's family are directly in the story. All of these things there seems to be it's more than just a coincidence. These stories are definitely linked. At the very least, there's a prophetic element to it. But I think really, and it's interesting that the rabbis don't oftentimes pull that out. There are, as you can see, times when the rabbis invoke later history. They just did it with Jephthah in the Midrash. So they are capable of doing it, which again kind of begs the question, why don't they do it all the time? And why don't they do it in the most obvious cases with King David? And in this story, it's a really strange, there's some very strange repetition. And it can't just be a coincidence, because actually the word teraphim is not used a lot in the Bible. I mean, there's only a handful of occurrences, literally like 5 or 6 occurrences of the word teraph even used in the whole Bible. So these stories can't be a coincidence. In a few weeks, we're going to be reading about Joseph and his coat. The only time we have the words coat of many colors used is in Joseph's coat. And then, as people who've studied with me before this know, the coat that Tamar, David's daughter, is wearing when it gets ripped after her rape by her half-brother, Amnon, the only 2 times, there's 2 times, the only places that we have that word coat of many colors used is in Tamar's coat and Joseph's coat. That can't be a coincidence. The rabbis are playing off these stories of Jacob and his family constantly, or not the rabbis, the Bible is in the book of David. It's not, the fact that the rabbis actually don't deal with it more is really interesting, but we do today. I mean, we recognize the parallels and the fact that this is not a coincidence. So that's why I'm pointing it out. And again, when it's so obvious with the teraphim and a father being tricked on behalf of the son-in-law, we got to look at it. You have to look at it. So when we come back next week, we're going to be looking at the pact that they make with each other. That's the part that we'll continue with next time. And we will be getting into some great stories of Joseph coming up soon too. Anybody have any parting words that they want to share with us? We didn't say it at the beginning, but we do want to thank God for the mitzvah of studying Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, for studying the words of Torah. And today, as we celebrate Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day in the counting of the Omer, in the 33rd day of this period, we've gone through quarantine during this period. We've now made it through a month after Passover. And as we look ahead to the last 2.5 weeks before Shavuot, before the Feast of Weeks, today, according to tradition, is supposed to be a day of break from the mourning type practices of the Omer, the more strict and enforced times. of Omer. Some people have a tradition of not shaving on any day except for Lag BaOmer today. Why was Lag BaOmer the day chosen? Well, one of the reasons the rabbis tell us for Lag BaOmer, though it could also have to do with the fact that this was a time for May Day celebrations and for pagan type celebrations in other cultures. According to the tradition of why Lag BaOmer is special is because according to tradition today, Rabbi Akiva's students were dying from a plague. And on Lag BaOmer, the plague stopped. So there is a plague connection to Lag BaOmer on this day. But we also believe, as some of you know, that it probably was not a plague. It was that they were being murdered by the Romans, and that on this day, that murder stopped or took a pause, or some of them were not killed on this day. But the veiled reference to a plague probably was not a plague. It was that they were being killed because they supported the Bar Kokhba revolt, the last major revolt against the Romans in 135. That something happened on this day, which is why Lag BaOmer was a day traditionally celebrated with bow and arrow, people dressing up like hunters, because again, the Romans would never suspect that Jews would be hunting. But again, it could be that they were actually fighting, and there was a reason why they had that bow and arrow, was that they were fighting against the Romans. Now, Bar Kokhba wasn't successful in his rebellion, but again, Lag BaOmer is traditionally a day what people would celebrate, and sometimes even get married on this day. So it was not uncommon for people to get married on Lag BaOmer as a day of kind of celebration in the midst of Omer restrictions, which again, I shaved this morning in honor of Lag BaOmer. I shaved, whatever. I did. I knew I was going to be on, knew I was going to be with all of you today.
I shaved too, Rabbi.
Did you? Let me see.
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah, you did. Did you do it with Lag BaOmer?
Fancy.
All right,
I did
everybody.
too, but I'm not going to show you.
Good.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Judith, for being our reader today. And again,
Always a pleasure.
everybody stay healthy and take care of yourself. And it's good to see everybody today. So
See you tomorrow night.
we'll see you tomorrow night.
Mark?
Everybody. Yes.
Mark, what's the other period of time in the Jewish calendar where you can't get married before Tisha B'Av? What is that?
In the period between Tisha B'Av and the 3 weeks, weeks between the fast of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. During that period, during the summer, was also traditionally a time of people not getting married until Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, and then people would start to give up those morning rituals of the period of the destruction of the temple. So yeah, there were 2 periods where people didn't get married traditionally, like April till May, Passover to Shavuot, and then also those 3 weeks of Av, where they are Tammuz to Av, where they wouldn't get married. So those are prime marriage times, and people would traditionally not. But today, most
Is that
people
followed outside the Orthodox world today, or not really?
Not even in the conservative world do they stop weddings during that period. Most people again don't know when that they don't follow the morning practices of Omer, and they also don't usually follow. Unfortunately, most people don't even know when Tisha B'Av is. I mean, this year it's the beginning of August, usually the end of July or August. That actually sometimes happens on my birthday, Tisha B'Av, which is a fast day, but
And my wedding anniversary too.
so this year Tzom Tammuz is the 9th of July, and it goes till Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the 30th of July. Tu B'Av is the 5th of August, and so it's just after. So Tisha B'Av is the 29th to the 30th. So this year, that 3-week period would basically be July 9th through the 30th. And people do get married in the summer. Don't know if they're going to get married this summer, but
The wedding I had was canceled
my weddings in June have all been
just before.
they've all been postponed all the way through to September. All my weddings have been postponed. Though I do have a virtual baby naming, by the way. My first baby naming during this period is going to be it's going to be Friday. It's Friday. We're supposed to do a baby naming. Virtual naming. All right, everybody.
Virtual baby.
Take care.
What are they doing about
Not a
bringing
virtual
milk?
baby.
What about a
Virtual
bris?
baby.
How are they doing a bris?
That would be
Couple
creepy.
weeks.
Virtual
Bye-bye.
babies. What, Judith?
How are they doing a bris?
They did it in the hospital. The baby's name is Caden. I don't think they were that observant. They named the baby Caden. It's a beautiful
They're
name,
having a baby naming.
but they're doing a baby name. That's right. Let's not diminish that. All right, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.